Welcome back to Crossroads. Weekly protests have continued in Gaza along the border with Israel, despite Egypt and UN officials working on a possible ceasefire deal. 2 Palestinians were killed and hundreds of others were injured.
The Israeli military said Palestinians were attempting to cross the border and throwing more flaming balloons. Correspondent Daniel Tzemach reports from the border.
Yes, well, it was another active Friday on the Israel-Gaza border as the protests on the Palestinian side continue. Today, according to the Israeli military, there were some 4,000 Palestinians demonstrating at 5 different flashpoints along the border, hurling Molotov cocktails, burning tires, as well as throwing IEDs on a few instances. None of that resulted in any Israeli injuries, but as a result of Israeli gunfire, according to the Palestinian Health Ministry, 2 Palestinians were killed and some 200 were injured. Ultimately, this is all happening at the backdrop of ongoing negotiations between Israel and Hamas, as brokered by Egypt and the UN. Earlier, we actually had a chance to speak to a subject of those talks that's pretty important, that being Leah Golden, the mother of Hadar Golden, whose body is being held by Hamas in the Gaza Strip. Let's hear what she had to say about these reported talks.
We are dealing with Hadar Golden that was killed 4 years ago, 2 hours after ceasefire was declared. Actually, it was a violation of a ceasefire. And we are standing here as it's still, the Hamas and the PA are in a standing violation of that ceasefire with regard to Hadar case. So how in heaven can anyone get to any understanding before you correct the evil, before you rectify this standing violation?
Ultimately, we'll have to see if the violence that went on along the Gaza border today with Israel will disrupt the ongoing talks between Israel and Hamas as brokered by the UN and Egypt, or if we'll actually see a deal being closed in the coming days or even in the week to come. That's it for now from the Israel-Gaza border. Daniel Tzemach, I24NEWS.
All right, thanks to Daniel Tzemach. Israeli police say an Israeli Arab man suspected of trying to stab a policeman in Jerusalem's Muslim quarter has been shot to death. The incident took place on Friday afternoon in the alleys of the Old City.
After the attempted stabbing, a confrontation ensued and the suspect was killed. The scene of the crime and the surrounding alleys have been cordoned off.
The Turkish economy continues to feel the pain from U.S. sanctions. The lira plunged yet again after the Trump administration warned of even more sanctions.
The growing tension stems from the case of an American pastor charged with being a spy who is on house arrest in Turkey. And President Trump has taken a hard line with Turkey over the issue and has called for the pastor's immediate release.
Well, Turkey's been a problem for a long time. They have not acted as a friend. We'll see what happens. They have a wonderful Christian pastor. He's a wonderful man, Pastor Brunson. They made up this phony charge that he's a spy. They should have given him back a long time ago. And Turkey has, in my opinion, acted very, very badly. So we haven't seen the last of that. We are not going to take it sitting down. They can't take our people. So you will see what happens.
Well, for more, let's bring in Ryan Morrow. He's a national security analyst for the Clarion Project. And Ryan, a lot of tough talk, threats and sanctions against Turkey. Do you believe it's all about Pastor Brunson's release, or is this just a melting point that President Trump and President Erdogan have reached after they've been on a collision course for a while?
We've had issues with Turkey and Erdogan for a very long time, but I was among many who were concerned about things that President Trump was saying in support of Erdogan, seeming not to care that he was becoming an Islamist dictator. There were ongoing Turkish influence operations, trying to influence anyone in Congress and anyone in politics, but especially the Trump administration. They did have some success. So having this break happen because Erdogan just went too far, because there's no gray zone under which he can defend detaining an American pastor. So I think he made a big mistake. But seeing this break happen is something that is actually very positive. And hopefully it makes the United States really recognize that there is a true alliance between Turkey, our supposed ally, Qatar, our supposed ally, and the Muslim Brotherhood and other radical Islamic terrorists, and we have to confront it. It's more than just a disagreement between two people with different points of views. We have an ideological and proxy conflict with Turkey and Qatar.
So we see that the Turkish currency continues to drop, and Erdogan doesn't really have much leverage on the United States, as you say. He knows that, though, and yet he continues to flex his muscles. Why?
Because contrary to how some have assessed Erdogan, he is not just a pragmatist who's out for his own power. He's not your typical dictator. He is an ideological tyrant. And he is a supporter of a radical Islamic movement that believes in reestablishing the caliphate, whether he calls it that or not. He and the government of Qatar regularly support Hamas, Muslim Brotherhood, and elements of al-Qaeda when it doesn't make sense, except for the fact that they support that agenda. And so hopefully from this break in the relationship between the United States and Turkey, we recognize these broader problems and handle them accordingly instead of doing what we've been doing since 2002 and looking the other way and saying Erdogan is a moderate that we can work with, and if we have a fight with him, we can get past it because we just have common interests. No, we don't. Turkey is not the Turkey that we've been dealing with historically, and we have to really, and I think a lot about using this term, and I choose deliberately, we have to recognize that the Turkish government is an enemy of the West.
Ryan, let's talk about the end game here. How do you see this crisis coming to an end? I mean, do you think Turkey will eventually release the pastor? And then what? The relations, it seems like they'll probably never be the same again.
Well, it won't be the same again because now Erdogan is understanding that there are certain lines that he can't cross. Now, if the relationship is somewhat healed after the pastor is released, and I do believe he'll be released. Erdogan has a big ego, so he'll want to somehow claim victory. He's like Putin that way, similar personalities. But he recognizes that this doesn't make sense, even if he's pursuing a radical Islamic agenda, because he has an incremental strategy towards advancing what he wants to do. So eventually I think Turkey will release the pastor. And then the big question at that point comes, will the Trump administration at that point have realized that this is the symptom of a much bigger problem that we have with Turkey, and one that quite frankly cannot be healed? And also, I hope that the crash of the Turkish currency makes us realize the opportunities we have in the Middle East to really stick it to our adversaries. You have the Iranian regime under tremendous pressure because of the sanctions that haven't even kicked in fully yet. You have the Turkish currency collapsing. Qatar's now saying that we'll bail out Turkey with $15 billion, which amounts to about $420,000 per family in Qatar. That's something that we should be using against the government of Qatar politically. So we have all these opportunities where if we want to shape the Middle East in our favor in a very decisive, noticeable way, that opportunity is right now.
So you say that Turkey is an enemy of the United States, an enemy of the West, and yet the United States and Turkey are both NATO allies. And being such, they do have some shared interests in different parts, different conflicts of the world. So where does it hurt the most, the fact that the U.S. doesn't have a good relationship with a NATO ally right now?
Really, the only pushback that you'll get is that we have military bases there. But let's recognize the purpose of those military bases. We're the United States. We're a superpower. We can move a military base if we can put a man on the moon. And so there is this weird dynamic where a lot of people in Washington are saying, oh, we are dependent upon Turkey because our bases are there. No, that's Turkey being dependent upon us and somehow trying to switch it around to make it seem to be the opposite. We can adjust to having to the reality that Turkey is so adversarial towards the United States. And there are many problems with NATO going on right now. Turkey is the biggest problem. It just doesn't get the most attention. I think at the very least, the Trump administration has to say there needs to be an established process for kicking a member of NATO out. That process doesn't exist. Turkey will know we're talking about them.
Sure. All right, Ryan Morrow, national security analyst for the Clarion Project. Thanks.
Thank you.
Still to come. Intelligence sources in London say the driver who plowed into cyclists near Parliament is not a terrorist.
And it's been 4 years since 4 Palestinian boys were killed on a beach, but a new report suggests the attack was carried out by a weapon Israel kept secret.